I'm here with Sara Shake, founder of Vacancy. Welcome. So happy to have you.
Glad to be here.
Yeah, so I love the whole concept of vacancy and finding your partner brand's vacancy, and the philosophy that goes into that, right? Understanding the competitive landscape. And we've gone through that process together. But I guess, how do you start? Like, where do you start when it comes to that process? And, how does that unlock value for brands?
For sure. So it always depends on whether a brand is starting from scratch or they're in existence already, right? So a lot of the work that we do is not just for new brands, but also for a brand that's like identified that they need a repositioning. So we're really big on, that foundational brand work. So where we begin is always with a brand workshop, which is kind of our guided conversation to deep dive into the brand. And of course, it starts with kind of sketching out that competitive landscape. And when we say, find your vacancy, it really means find your space. So when you look at everybody in kind of a set, if everyone's going one way, then we kind of encourage our clients to go the other.
I love that. I think there's a ton of synergy in the way that we look at the competitive landscape and help our partners move forward. And you do the same, right? You're looking at the brand level. We're looking at the kind of media activation level. So yeah, it's refreshing to hear that. I think there's a ton of synergy there.
I mean, of course, if all of your competitors are doing something and it's working for all of them, you have to pay attention to that too, right? We're not always saying that you have to be kind of the outlier. But I think for brands that are, chasing authenticity and they're chasing their own voice, you really have to look at, what is the space that I can uniquely own?
Yeah. And it's really easy to get lost as an advertiser, marketer, and all of the different, you know, areas and the deep holes that you get down into when you're planning, right? You have to understand, okay, we're looking at, audience, and we're looking at reach, and we're looking at targeting and measurement and all these things. And at the end of the day, the creative piece is really the only thing that your consumer is seeing, the only thing that you're putting out into the market. So I guess, how do you help educate and emphasize that creative really is the most important thing? Because that's something that I've always really leaned heavily into and understood really moves the needle on performance.
Yeah. So I was thinking about this question and I was kind of researching a little bit more. And it's like the creative has to lead, right? And the creative has to be derived from the brand and the brand voice and the brand archetype and also who you're speaking to. So that's really the first piece. It doesn't matter who the audience is, what the tactics are, if the creative is not something that's going to give people pause or something that's going to grab someone's attention, because we're in an attention economy, right? So it has to be creatively led, and more important, that creative can't be derived from the temptation to copy what other successful brands are doing, right? It has to be derived from your own unique brand voice, because when you start to, and it's easy, right? Like it's easy to see something and be like, oh, I love that. I love what that person's doing. And so I want to copy the tactic, but I also want to copy the creative, right? So, what we encourage brands to do is like lean in so hard to your own voice that like you become the person that gets copied, right? And that's a great space to be in. That's for us, that's a big indicator of success.
Yeah, I love that. And I think a lot of the ways that brands think about their creatives now is history and what kind of numbers do we have about our buyers and for existing brands, of course, and what, who are our competitors' buyers. I think that needs to be combined a little bit with the competitive landscape. Like, where are you winning and losing? And what is your new creative or your most recent creative speaking to? And is that fully optimized when it comes to who you're targeting with, what kind of data you're using to define your audience, and where you're rolling that out across channels and different publishers? And I think that's, a really exciting thing that we've been able to do with the power of AI enabling more deterministic creative measurement. It's something that's kind of unstructured, and artsy when we're at Art Basel, you're talking about creative.
Right.
So I think, how do you think AI has really leveled up the playing field in the ways that you can kind of quantify the value of creative?
I mean, AI has changed the game completely, right? Not just from a creative standpoint, which pretty much takes off any limitation you might have had from a budget, feasibility standpoint before. So I think that that's really important. I think one of the other cool things that you guys are doing is like identifying opportunities, right? So sometimes the creative that converts the most is not the most exciting creative, right? And I think that it takes a lot of courage for brands to go, I want to try something new we know that it may not be the tried and true, way of conversion, but if we can make a strong argument based on the data and what the data is telling us that we may have a lane here,
Right.
then we can try something new. And maybe that, gives people more, I don't know, courage, more or more comfort knowing that like, hey, there is an opportunity here that you're not tapping into, and you might have a chance to do something that, is creative, that really resonates, or might be a little different than what you've done in the past.
Yeah. And what that looks like, and I think the way that, AI can really help understand that and look at the whole competitive landscape, quantify the creative piece of this, and understand an example would be, 90% of the brands in your vertical leverage a promotion based call to action at the end. So maybe there's an opening in the emotional side of things that you can connect with audiences. And maybe that's an area for you to lean in. And maybe your existing creative doesn't do a great job of that, but there's a way to, level that up pretty quickly with, generative AI to do, add on an overlay or something else that evokes that opportunity and taps into that white space. And another thing that we talked about that I thought was pretty interesting that you brought up is like the balance of leaning into these AI tools, which are super tempting because they save so much time and you can get pretty quality content, versus when it makes sense to kind of stick with the traditional style of art, hand drawn, these kinds of things. Like, how do you balance that?
Um, I think that, AI should be used as a tool to free up time to let creatives be more creative, right? At the end of the day, every creative is an artist of some type, right? Whether they're a copywriter, whether they're an art director, whether they're a designer, an illustrator. And I think creatives really want, certainly in my agency, no one asks for less time.
Right.
Everyone wants more time. So I think if you can look at AI as a tool that says, you know what, I can automate a piece of this process, but I can still begin with something that feels very, very organic, very handcrafted in a way, or at least original, right? It's an idea that I generated through a brainstorm or something that we may think is kind of old fashioned, right? But of course, AI is only going to be as good as what you put into it. And so if you start with a great, concept, then it should help you build from there and just be more efficient, And I think that that's certainly how we've used AI to kind of maintain that kind of hand touch, human touch, right?
Yeah. No, and some of the work that Vacancy does is so incredible. And I think, it's amazing to see the way that, and I ask you all the time, like, what kind of generative AI tools are you guys using? Because this looks so beautiful. The outputs are really impressive. And I think in the past, it's taken massive teams to accomplish something like that, so much time. And now you can, as long as you have a very strategic mind who really has, tunnel vision on the outcome, leading the charge, then you can do big things with a nimble team.
Well, look, if you think about what's resonating with people right now in the luxury market, you see surrealism really coming out. So like AI is perfect for that because it's fantastic. It's fantasy, and so AI does a great job of doing that. The flip side of that is nostalgia, right? So brands that you've worked on and other brands that we've worked on, and they're like, I want it to feel like it was from the 80s, from the 90s. Like people want that nostalgic look. So, it's great because in the current moment, we're going to get, what's out there in the present, but AI allows us to kind of go into that future, go into that past, and still have it feel very modern and very like of the moment.
Yeah. I think it's starting to get to the point for some younger audiences where they're getting a little like AI fatigue, and they're smarter, Gen Z audiences are smarter about identifying like, oh, that was made with AI. That was lazy.
Mhm.
Right. Versus, so I think sometimes bringing it back now, some of the white space lies in that nostalgic, old fashioned type of attitude. Is that something that you started to see at all, or you're able to, I guess, right, give that feel, and the AI piece is really helping you understand, what's resonating best?
I think it's no, it's certainly something that you hear more than you've ever heard before is like, oh, that's just AI. Like they didn't write that. That's just AI. And I think like that's something as a marketer you've never really had to overcome before.
Yeah.
That's a new thing, right? And so I think that we're taking a look at that, especially I think on the messaging side and making sure that it's always at least the original idea, still derived from those brand workshops, those brand exercises that we've done. But I think it's also spaces, right? Like people are retreating from like the big social media platforms to these smaller spaces that are either like Facebook groups or small chat rooms or small
Discord, yeah.
experiential activities, because they are kind of fatigued by the barrage of, AI driven advertising that they're getting every day.
Yeah, it's like if you used M dashes in the past, I'm sorry for you, because now anything with an M dash is like, that was AI.
It used to be my favorite. It used to be my favorite. I'm kind of a copywriter at heart, and it is really sad to see what's happened to the M dash. But yeah, and I mean, I think that's something that's the original tell, right? And everyone can spot that in a second.
Yeah. Sometimes if I'm having AI help me write things, I'm like, no M dashes, please. I can't,
Exactly.
No one can know. But everyone's probably doing that. You mentioned when we were talking earlier that experiential is having a moment. And you were just talking about that. I guess, how important is it for brands in this age where there is a lot of education on, consumers understanding when you're a little bit lazy and when brands feel inauthentic? How important is it for these brands to have a tangible, physical, visible presence?
Yeah. So it's like if you were to go to Cannes Lions this year and hear how many times the word authentic or authenticity was repeated and repeated, and it's like, well, great, but how do I actually implement that, right? Like it's in theory, it's a great idea. I think experiential coming back, it gives people just that sense of authenticity that they're chasing. And I think that like we see a lot of smaller, more agile brands doing it really well. And again, that's like it's a pretty bold move on the side of the brands, because if you were to look at the ROI of that, I'm sure it's not a one-to-one, right? So I think it's coming back. I think it's high time that it has, right? We're out of the pandemic, and brands are finally realizing that this is a way to connect with people, and it is giving them that sense of authenticity and an insight into the brand's personality that you just can't have digitally.
Yeah.
Right?
100%. No, that's awesome. As we approach 2026, what advice do you have for brands about how to move with creative philosophy in the AI era?
Well, that's a big question. I think that, you can always go back to brands and find kind of your root there, right? And I think like like I said, it's very tempting to get pulled into the data side of things, but if you can use data like to make decisions, but also be bold and take those risks. Obviously, the more information that you have behind you to kind of support the decisions that you make, especially from a marketer that might have be putting their neck out for an idea. AI is only going to embolden us to make better decisions, to make better creative, and to just go forward with more information. I think it's great. But I think that brands still have to, stay true to who they are and make sure that kind of those core brand pillars, those core messaging pieces really come through in everything that they do.
Yeah. No, you're preaching to the choir, because that's exactly kind of all the things that we talk about. And, I know for all these brands, right, if they haven't gone back to the drawing board and really looked into the ethos and the core of like how their brand was built, I think that's something you do an amazing job helping brands with. So yeah. Thank you so much for being here. It was great.
Of course.